So today we'll continue with Azure Data Factory, right? Yesterday we discussed about the basics of Data Factory. Yesterday we tried and understand what the Data Factory resource helps you do, right? It lets you move data from one place to the other. Today we'll continue on that path and we'll try and understand how you can move more data, right, in different ways. First of all, the sole purpose of using Azure Data Factory, right, is that you want to copy data from one place to the other, right? So that is why very many projects you'll see, even if you go and find many interviews on YouTube, right, where people have interviewed for Azure Data Engineer, they will always tell you one simple thing, that to move the data from one place to the other, they used Azure Data Factory, right? They would say that they had data from various sources, they had to bring it to the data lake, or they had data from various sources which they had to bring into their database, or they had data in various sources which they had to bring into their warehouse. So in that case, they are using something called as data factory. So the primary purpose, right? And we'll go to transformation and different types of transformation and everything we'll see. But first, we have to understand the two parts of ETL, that is E and L, right? How to extract data from various sources and how to load data to various sources. Once you understand that about the Azure Data Factory, then we can add transformations. There are many. If you want to delete the data as source, if you want to get the metadata, if you want to do a lookup activity in your table, if you want to run a stored procedure in your table, if you want to select specific rows, data flows, right? Data flow transformations are there. So everything is there within Data Factory. But first, we'll focus on copying and pasting data, right? Copying data from various sources, putting that data into various sources. Once we get that clarity, once we have that information, we can very well go ahead and then look at the transformations and different other activities, right? Conditional statements, putting multiple activities together, everything we'll see. So anybody has any doubt from yesterday's class where we discussed about this copy data activity that we had? If I go to author within my pipeline, I'd be able to see the copy data. And in data sets, I'll be able to see two data sets here, right? Now, if you want, you can edit these data sets. You can rename them, whatever you want to do, right? You can do that. But when you're creating the pipeline, you always have to keep one thing in mind, that you can either define the pipeline and then the data sets, or there is another way of doing it where you define the data set first. For example, let me open PPT and let me show it to you. See, yesterday the method that I followed, yesterday's method was very simple. I created the pipeline, and within the pipeline, I created my source and destination data set, right? That is one way of doing it. There is another way of doing it, which is you can just simply define your data first. You know where the data is, how to connect to it, and what is the type of the data on one place. That becomes your source data set. When you know what data you have to pick, let's say I know that within the data lake, what I'm trying to say is, when you know that your source data is very simple, right? It's a CSV file present within the data lake. You know the name of the data lake, you know the name of the container, right? And you have a link service already existing for that source, and you know the destination, right? You know the destination, that the data has to be saved as a CSV. The data needs to be saved into a SQL database, let's say, for example, and you have a link service to that SQL database also. If this is the case, right, then you can define data sets also independently, right, before defining the pipeline itself. So I'll tell you what I'm trying to say here. Earlier, I clicked on this new pipeline. I came to my new pipeline, then put my copy data activity here, and then started defining the source and the destination data set here, because this time my source data set will change. This is data sets from the previous pipeline that I had created. Let's say I don't want to use this. I want to use the Parquet data set, because here my source data set was CSV, destination was Parquet. If you remember the yesterday's pipeline that we created. So obviously I'll have to create a new data set here. So what I'm doing, I'm coming to the pipeline and then creating the data sets. There is an alternate way of doing it as well. The alternate way of doing it is, you create the data sets first. All right. So what we'll do now, I'll show you how you can create that data set. All right. Independently. So let's do one thing. Let me go to my database. So what I'll do now my step would be to copy data. So now I'll try and copy the data from my one location to another location. This time I'll read data from a Parquet file. Close this. Yeah, I want to read data from a Parquet file, right? And this Parquet file is present in my data lake. And where do I want to copy this data? I want to copy this data into a table within my SQL database, right? So today we'll try and see this particular scenario also where we want to move data from a file to a SQL database using Azure Data Factory. Let's try it out. All right, step by step we'll go. So I will define first of all my source data set, obviously, because what it will take, you already remember, the pipeline requires multiple things. It requires, first of all, is your data set. So you need to define the source data set, right? And I'll put my source data set underscore P2 over here. Why? Because this is pipeline number 2. So for me to identify which data set is being used in which pipeline or which data set was created for which pipeline, this becomes really important. All right, that is why whenever you're defining also your pipeline, you give it a code so that in future identification of the pipeline becomes easier, right? If you just start giving English names, right, there is no primary key there. So P2 here works as the primary key. All right, P2 will help me identify. It will be unique for every data set. It will be unique for all the source data sets. It will be unique for all destination data sets, and it will be unique for my pipeline also. So source data set for pipeline number 2. The second thing that I need to define is the link service. Now, link service is optional. Please don't get confused. Optional in case if it already exists. So in case I have the same, I have to pick the data from the same data lake, right? I was going to pick the data from the same data lake. That is why a link service already exists. So this is optional. That means I can select the existing link service also. I can reuse the link service. The third thing that I need in order to create is the pipeline itself, right? I need the pipeline. So let's start creating these three things. Now, if I go to my data factory, I have to create data sets. Now, creation of link services could be done from two places, right? When you're creating link service, you can create it in two places. All right. The first place is when I come to data sets and I say I want to create a new data set. So the moment I want to create new data set, I'll show you both the link services creation in the source and the destination data set. So now my file is present where? My file is present in my data lake. If you remember, I wanted to move the Parquet file activity log 01 from the data container in my data lake to a SQL database, correct? Within my data factory, I will say that it exists in the data lake. What is the type of the file? It is a Parquet based data. Click on continue. I'll call it source dataset underscore P2. All right, P2 for understanding that it is pipeline. It is going to be used in pipeline number 2. Link service already exists. So this is the first place where I could create the link service. If it does not exist already, I can click on new and create one over here itself. So the first way of creating the link service is to create it, within my data set. When I'm creating the data set, at that time, I can go ahead and create it. If not, if it already exists, I will select it from here. Then if I browse, it will show me the containers. So it is in my data container and it's the activity log 01 Parquet file that I want to copy, right? Click on OK. from this connection that got established, it will get the schema also of the file, right? So this is my source data set P2. If I want to test the connection, if I want to preview the data, I can do that. All right. So this is my Parquet data present in my activity log1.parquet file. This is the link service which is being used, right? So this is the first way of doing it. So my data set is created, and you see, if you remember, when we were doing dedicated SQL pool and serverless SQL pool there, when working with Parquet files, we had to mention the compression used or the compression type. So there is two, gzip and snappy, right? Generally, we use only these two. So let it be snappy, right? Snappy codec is very well sufficient to read Parquet files and to encode Parquet files also, to decode them also and to encode them also. Snappy codec will help you do that. So my data set is created. I'll publish it to save it. Let me publish it. Now, the second way of creating the link service is to go to the manage section. When I go to manage section, I have a section there for link services. I'll open link services here. And since my destination is now a SQL database, so do I have a link service connecting me to that SQL database? The answer is no.
No.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I said no.
Yeah, fine. So the link service does not exist as of now. So I need to first create that connection to the SQL database, right? Before I can put my data into the SQL database, I need to be able to connect to that SQL database. So I'll click on new, and now I'll say that my location is a SQL database here, Azure SQL DB. I'll select it. I'll click on continue. I'll call this NIC SQL DB linked service. Oh, it's not typing. Let me do it over here. NIC SQL DB linked service. All right. So this link service will help me connect to a SQL database because I have selected SQL database. So it will ask me SQL database specific questions, right? Because when I want to connect to different data stores, I will have different types of questions. For example, if it's a data lake, it will ask me for the data lake location, or the URL it will expect would be of a data lake. It will expect account key, right? The access keys that we had. But when I select it to be Azure SQL database, then it will ask me SQL database specific questions. For example, server name. Now, the server name would not come when I'm creating the link service to the data lake because there is no server there. But in the database, there is a server. So I'll select Visual Studio Code. Now, version, I will let it be 2.0, which is recommended for the link service for SQL database. All right, this is a new version. You can select one also. It also works in the same manner. Nothing different, right? I'll select the server. So NIC SQL Server was the server that I had created. If you want to see in my database, NIC SQL Server is where this database is hosted, right? The server name is NIC SQL Server.database.windows.net. So I'll open my query editor, and there are chances that it will not let me connect to the database if my IP address has changed. All right. So if in case my IP address has changed, it will deny this connection. If not, this will be fine. All right. So it says it's not available as of now. Let's try and debug this situation. If I go to overview section now, and if I go to my server, so you can go to the server just by clicking on the server name. Now this is where you will have to do some hard work, right? Because of the security features. If I go to security and I go to networking, in public access, I will have to add my current IP address. Now, if you see the previous IP address that my system had, right? Because it's a dynamic IP address, the public IP address that you get, right? It's a leased based IP address, and your internet service provider will change it regularly, right? So the last time when I used this database, I think it was last week. At that time, this was my IP address. And the current IP address that I am using is this one in the box here. So what I can do, I can add it and save it, right? If you don't want to, let's say, do this every time, you can add a firewall rule itself, right? You can give a range of IP address. See, generally what happens is when you're working with IP addresses, the first 3 bytes generally remain constant. It can happen on the same network, it can happen sometimes. And this last byte changes, right? So when I say byte, I hope everybody understands that IP addresses are 4 bytes. This is byte number 1, this is byte number 2, this is byte number 3, and this is byte number 4, right? So I can give a range here. I can do 0 to 255, right? So now it will allow all the IP addresses from 0 to 255. That also I can do if I want, right? So I can save that also. So this will also work for me. Why? Because my IP address falls in between of this range. All right, fine.
Yes, I have one question here.
Yeah, go
This
ahead.
IP address is a static in real time also. It will be dynamic or it is going to be project specific static.
See, configuration of IP address, whether it is static or dynamic, depends on people who are doing the administrative task. All right.
Okay,
Within Azure, you get both the types. All right.
okay, got it.
Within Azure, you will have a static IP address also, and you will have a dynamic IP address also. So if I show you and I go to public IP, there's a resource called public IP address. All right. So if I go to public IP addresses, uh, let me create a new one. So you have two options here when you create a public IP address. Uh, Standard is, I think, the one that they're giving now. So within standard, you get static. All right. Within standard now, they're giving static. I think they got rid of the dynamic some time ago uh, because basic SKU is not available here. So within basic, I get dynamic and static both. All right. So dynamic is only available for basic SKU. So static means it's a higher cost because I'm giving an IP address that will never change for you, right? So both are there. Static is also there, dynamic is also there, right? So
But we created a static one or dynamic one. Which one we created for this type
for
of
my
work?
see when we
Yes.
created, right, we were creating it for virtual machines. As of now, virtual machine is the only resource that we have connected to IP address, right? So there are a handful of resources in Azure that require IP address. All right. Most of them, they don't require IP address. Most of them would work with, if I show you, see, a virtual machine requires IP address. Then there is a firewall resource that requires an IP address because firewall will also have an IP address, right? When people want to connect to your resources, they will first connect to the firewall. A VPN will have a IP address, right? So there are multiple resources that have a IP address, but there are some resources that don't have an IP address. For example, my storage account. If you see, storage account has something called FQDN, fully qualified domain name. Storage account name .blob.co.windows.net. They have a URL. All right. Similarly, your server, which is the SQL server that I'm talking about, right? Or your Synapse SQL pool. They also have a SQL server, right? So they have what you call is a fully qualified domain name. If I go to my SQL server, right, I have added it. Let me go to the overview. You will see over here, let it load. Let me go to the database itself. I'll show you. This is the URL of your server. This is what you get. You don't get an IP address, right? So I'm not talking about Azure IP addresses here. This IP address that you add here in the server is your IP address. All right. Now, if you see, last time with the IP address that I had added, it was something else. And this time the IP address that I have added is something else. So that means the IP address is changing. Yes or no?
Yes.
And this is my IP address. When it says client, this is my system that I'm using, its IP address. All right. So when I'm trying to connect to the SQL database, the connection is being established from my machine. And in my machine, I'm using this IP address. So I will be allowing this IP address to connect to the SQL server because I want to connect to it and explore the databases. Clear?
Yeah, clear.
So this is your IP address and this is dynamic. And in the standards queue, you already saw that there is an option for static IP address also. But That is not something that we have to worry about. It's the job of network administrators and Azure infrastructure administrators to worry about,
Correct,
right?
correct, correct,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. Now here, if I come back to my data factory, I wanted to connect to my SQL server, right? So SQL server is already there. I'll select the database name. I have selected NIC SQL server, and within my NIC SQL server, I have hosted this NIC SQL database. So I'll select that. Authentication, I'll do the SQL authentication. Let me remember what the username was. I think it was SQL admin or something. If I go to query editor, it is SQL admin. I'll copy the username and I'll put the password that I had kept for this login. But before that, let me open the SQL database myself also. It should be able to connect now. Yeah. So now no issues with the connection. If I go to the tables, I would be able to see some sample data here, but I want to create my own table. All right. I'll not be putting data into these tables directly because I want to create my own table and then put the data there. So to do that, I'll come back here first of all. Right. We'll do that later. First, let's create this link service that you are working on. And that is all that which is required. If I click on test connection, let's see what happens. So connection is successful. I will create this. Now, in case you get the error that this connection was not successful, what you have to do is you have to go to your SQL database again, right? So you go to your SQL database, open it, go to the SQL server, right? And here in the networking section, please check this exception. Allow Azure services and resources to access this server. All right. Sometimes if this is unchecked, right, then here uh, this link service, right, that we have created, the SQL database link service. If I try and test the connection, it is giving successful because I have a managed identity already created. I got the details from my SQL database here itself. That is why it is getting successful. But if you, in case you find it, difficult to connect to it, make sure you have saved this particular exception here, right? This is fine. Link service is now working. So those are the two ways of creating the link service. First, when you create the data set, create the link service there itself. Second, you create the link service by coming to this manage section and then going to link service and create it. So my source data set was created within the pipeline, source data set for P2. Now let's create the destination data set. But how can I create a destination data set until and unless I have the table ready in the SQL database? Do you understand that? Is that clear?
Yes, yes,
First, I need to have the table where I need to put the data. As of now, I don't have the table, right? So what I'll do, I'll go to my query editor and I'll put the code to create this table. Create table pool activity log. Let me run this. Query succeeded. If I come to my tables and I refresh my database from here and I go to tables again, I should be able to see pool activity log here somewhere. See, pool activity log table now exists. So these are the columns there. So my table has been created. If I want to see the details of my table, I can just run a simple select query, select star from pool activity log. Now, SQL as a language, is it case sensitive? Is SQL a case sensitive language?
no,
It's not. So select star from the table will work exactly, right, as select star from pool activity. Both of them will give you the same result. If I show you, let's run this first one. So there are no rows here. If I run this, it will do the same thing. There are no rows here. So one thing you have to keep in mind that SQL is case insensitive. If I make some changes here, make it a capital E, make this a capital F, does this affect or this will also work in the same way?
it works.
It works, right? Again, if I run this, I'll get my details. So now my table is there in the SQL database from what I had drawn here. The table is ready here, but I don't have the data set as of now. I'll have to create the data set for it. My Parquet file is present in the data lake and I have created the data set also. Let me go to data factory now to create my destination data set. the data set for this SQL table. So I'll click on data set again. I'll select new data set, and this time it is my SQL database. So it's Azure SQL database. Click on continue. I'll call it my destination data set for pipeline number 2. Simple. The link service, we already created an IC SQL DB link service. I'll select that. Now, which table you want to put your data into? You can select it from here. I will have the pool activity log table right here. I'll select it, click on OK. Right now, everything is there. I can preview the data also here. Click on preview data. You will be able to see empty table, right? Correlation ID, operation name, everything is there, but it is empty. There's no data as such present in the table as of now. And this is what we need to work with. We need to put the data over there. If I test the connection to my SQL database, I can do that here. Connection is successful. So everything works. If I click on schema, I'll be able to see the entire schema of my table, right? And if the schema is not visible here, you can just click on import schema, and through the link service, through the connection that you have established, it will fetch the schema here, and you will be able to see the schema of your table. If I go to source dataset and I open the schema, I'll be able to see the schema over here also, right? Now, if I want to import the schema in this case, because it's not a table, right? It's either from the connection to the table or from a sample file. Let's say I have a sample file, I can import the schema from there also if I'm unable to import the schema from the connection, right? But it's already there. Now, let's publish the destination dataset also. So when you publish now, since source dataset was already published, so whatever new has been created or whatever edits have been made or whatever changes have been made, only they will be visible here. Let's publish this. So what do I have to do now? I need to now copy data from my file that is in storage account, NIC data lake, container, data container, activity log 1 parquet, right? So this is the file from which I need to pick the data, and this SQL database table dbo.pool activity log is the one that I need to use. So I think there are two databases here. We are currently, you can use a qualifier like this, or you can just give a statement like use, right? Use the database name. So you can use the database name, and that will become your default database name. So now data sets are created. So this is another way of creating pipeline that I wanted to talk to you about, right? So I told you first method, go to pipeline. And what I'll do is I'll change the name of this pipeline. I'll call this underscore or P1 underscore. P1 underscore copy data, right? So we understand. And in these data sets also, we'll change it later on, not required as of now. I'll create a new pipeline now, right? I'll call this P2 underscore copy data from Parquet to SQL, right? And I'll save this because I'm copying the data from a Parquet-based file to a SQL database now. Obviously, copy data activity is the one that we have to use for any extract or load functionality. This is your way to go. Copy data activity is the E and the L of ETL. The rest everything is T. Rest everything that you see here is generally T. All the activities that you see, right? If I come here, the activities, data flows, general activities, these are all transformation or getting information. But extraction, that is moving the data into my location where I want to process it, and loading the data into the destination will always use copy data activity. Now, like any other pipeline, I need to give some details here also. I'll call this copy data Parquet to SQL. That is the name of the activity that I've given. Coming to source, now I don't have to work from here. So this is the other way that I wanted to talk to you about, that now I don't have to go and create a new data set. I already created the data set. I knew where my data is, in what format my data is. So I can just simply select source dataset underscore P2 and it'll come here eventually. I can go to sync and I can just select the destination dataset P2. All right. Now here you will get some configuration. Uh, Insert, upsert, running a stored procedure. If I want to run a stored procedure before I start writing, I can select it from here. Upsert is basically updating and insert together. We'll come to that later on. As of now, it's just insert. Bulk insert, table lock. So if you are inserting very high quantity of data, do you want to lock the table until unless the entire copy activity has been completed? You can select yes or you can select no, right? So when you select yes, it will not perform any other activity or it will not perform any other query on the table until unless this is particular created. Table, I'm using the existing table, right? Any pre-copy script that I want to run here, right, within my database. So I can do that also. Auto create the table will create the table with the same schema, right? The source schema into my database. But I already have the table, right? Not required. If I go to mapping, I will click on import schema now. And this is where Azure Data Factory will automatically map the columns of my table. So now you see it has automatically mapped it. If there is an incorrect mapping, let's say I want resource group to go into the resource, right? I can move it down, I can move it up, or I can select that this value from the resource group should go into another value, right? As of now, there it shows no result found because all the columns have been mapped. So no column remains. If let's say uh, I delete this, now you'll see resource group and resource both are remaining, right? So I'll import the schema again. So one by one, you can start mapping all the columns. So resource is now mapped. If I delete resource, resource group, the resource type column, rest are mapped. If I come here, right, I'll be able to see the columns which have not been mapped as of now. Here also, I'll be able to see the columns which have not been mapped as of now. So I can say event initiated by should go into the column resource. I can do that. And now here I will be able to see event initiated by also because it remains unmapped. But Microsoft Azure will automatically do the correct mapping by looking at the column name. And in this case, the column names are same, so it does not have to do anything, right? And the mapping is successful. That is it. My pipeline has been created. I will publish this. Yeah, so it's published now. Any doubts until now? Until this step, any step that you are not comfortable with, you did not understand, data set, link service, anything that is creating a problem for you.